Good afternoon and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's public hearing for Thursday, May 19th, 2022, relative to Bill 2022-270. Will the clerk please read the title of the bill?
Bill 270, Ordinance Supplementing the Pittsburgh Code Title 7, Business Licensing, Article 7, Business Licenses, by creating a new Chapter 768, Accessory Short-Term Rentals.
All right, for the record, we are joined by Councilmember Strasburger and Councilman Kraus. Other members may join shortly, and I'll announce them as they join. So our first order of business will be hearing testimony from registered speakers. Once your name is called, please state your full name and address for the public record. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to address council. If you did not register in advance, we will open up testimony after we've exhausted the list of registered speakers. Non-registered speakers will receive 1 minute. Please keep in mind that this is an opportunity for the community to speak directly to Pittsburgh Council about the issue at hand and a time for council to listen. Therefore, council will not be responding to individual comments. All right, so let's start with our first speaker. Our first speaker is William Schlatter. And just so everyone knows, I don't know who's online and who's in person, but okay. Thank you, William.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Bill Schlatter, a longtime resident of Washington. The last time I spoke to you at standing committee, I highlighted the need for changes to the proposed short-term rental ordinance in order to promote community stability. The regulation of Airbnbs is a complex topic, and I would like to begin by sharing examples of some major cities that have acutely experienced the challenges of Airbnbs. Prior to any regulation, Philadelphia and Denver experienced major instability in their housing markets, which was partly fueled by Airbnbs owned by investor LLCs. Specifically, these corporate investors gobbled up and converted a slew of buildings and homes into Airbnbs, and sometimes even pushed out longtime apartment residents with a singular goal in mind: convert as many units as possible to transient Airbnbs to make more money. This predatory mentality, which is also currently happening in Pittsburgh, became a major problem for these communities as it decreased the amount of available housing supply, displaced long-term residents, and also increased long-term rental prices. Instead of creating stability, LLC-owned Airbnbs fueled an affordable housing crisis, which I'm certain all council members would agree that any policy that inflames our affordable housing crisis is just not good public policy. In order to counteract these challenges, these cities created a policy solution. They would permit Airbnbs, but only if it was a primary residence. Councilman Kraus and Lavelle touched on this in standing committee. The original spirit of an Airbnb was for a primary residence to offer a spare room or a house for a weekend if they were away. In this scenario, the Airbnb owner was a primary resident, the connection and care factor to the community, and not an absentee landlord or an LLC whose primary motivation was profit and not community stability. Additionally, I would like to strongly offer one last suggestion to the ordinance: to not permit multi-unit buildings to be utilized as Airbnbs. The current proposed ordinance states that hotels and bed and breakfasts are not permitted to be Airbnbs, but multi-units are permitted. We must ask ourselves the question: what in the world is the difference between a hotel and a multi-unit owned by investors and filled with 5, 10, 20, 30, or 50 units with the exclusive goal of being rented out for transient stays and not to long-term renters who pay taxes to the city? Let's just call this multi-transient Airbnb charade for what it is: a hotel masquerading in a legal loophole. As my wiser Mount Washington neighbor Barbara McKenna noted, who could not be here but has submitted separate remarks into the record, residential areas such as in Mount Washington fought a long battle to be zoned as residential and not for hotels. As someone who has also worked for our community and lived well over a decade from Mount Washington, around as long as Councilwoman Smith has served our community, I believe we should honor the promises set forth to our community.
Thank you, William. Our next speaker is Millie Stats, and I believe Millie is on the line.
Hi, Millie.
Looks like you're muted, Millie.
Unmute. Okay.
You're
Sorry.
good. You're not muted anymore. You're good.
All right, here I am. Okay, my name is Millie Stats. I've been a resident of Oak Cliff for more than 40 years. Thank you for permitting me to speak about Ordinance 22 and 170. Thank you for attempting to get some legislation in place to add residential neighborhoods as we see more and more short-term rentals in the city. But I do have some questions. Where's the enforcement of number of guest residents besides the optional annual inspections? I didn't see any. Does the public have to take pictures and videos of people coming and going? What if the license says 3 guests, but the neighbors see 10 entering a house every week? We can't get enforcement for our over-occupied homes now. How will this be different? Why the optional may be subject to annual inspection by PLI with a 2 weeks written notice? Why so long? If you're looking for infractions, that gives plenty of time for rooms and beds to be reconfigured. What about somebody who rents a single family home to one individual and that individual then proceeds to use the property as an accessory short-term rental? Is the owner liable for the infraction, or is it the single person on the lease who then turned it into a short-term rental? If the number of individuals permitted by the license is 3, like a single family home, can each of the short-term renters then have a guest for up to 1 to 15 days? And the consecutive 15 days clause, can I then leave for 1 day and come back for another 15? And who tracks that timing? Does it only matter if there's a complaint? And what about parking? With the new RPP registrations, a short-term owner is entitled to 1 parking permit as well as 2 visitor passes for registered guests for up to a week. But the guests can stay for up to 15 consecutive days. That sounds odd and also unfair to residents. I'm limited to 1 visitor pass and can only use it for 3 consecutive days. I believe that language in both the RPP legislation and the short-term rental legislation needs scrutiny and to be in line with what true long-term residents are entitled to. Think about street cleaning days in neighborhoods with no garages, alleys, or driveways. With the business license, are neighbors and public entitled to know what properties are being used as short-term rentals? Would there be a sign for some license posted in a public viewable spot? That's all I could think of right now in my fast planning for this hearing. Thank you very much. This legislation needs a lot of scrutiny. Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks, Millie. Our next speaker is Elena Zaitsoff. And Elena, you're online as well, so please begin speaking.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Elena Zaitsoff. I've lived in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of South Oakland for 42 years. Today, I would like to comment on Ordinance 2022-0270 regarding regulating and licensing short-term rentals. I recognize the need for legislation involving Airbnbs and commend you on your swift action on it. One of the whereases states, short-term residential rentals can impact on-street parking and traffic patterns. This is all too true. However, though recognizing this problem, the ordinance does nothing to help residents in this matter, and the new RPP ordinance actually allows Airbnb guests to have more passes than RPP residents can have. Under short-term rental permit guest passes, an owner can have their own pass and 2 guest passes for up to a week, while me, as a permanent resident, can only have 1 visitor's pass for 3 days at a time. Where is the equity in that? At some point, consideration of Pittsburgh residents in RPP areas has to be given for their daily parking challenges and not allow businesses to make their parking challenges harder. There is a reason the program is called Residential Parking Permit Program, indicating the need for permanent residents to be able to park in their neighborhoods. Little by little, the city is eroding the number of spaces available to residents. Airbnbs need to be excluded from the residential parking permit program. I see an influx of curb cuts, something DOMI is trying to limit, and yards covered with asphalt, something city planners are trying to avoid as Airbnb owners try to supply off-street parking. My second concern regards violations. We can't get PLI to investigate known occupancy violations now when proof can be supplied. This ordinance has a penalty for violations, but what does it matter if violations won't be determined? Residents are aware of violations, but get ignored. Anything you can do to get PLI to make this a priority and get more inspectors would be appreciated. Since these Airbnbs are acting as hotels, they need to be paying the hotel tax. If that's in the ordinance, I didn't see it. So please give more work to this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lauren Brinjak. Lauren, you can begin speaking whenever you can.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Lauren Brinjak. I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs with the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association. We represent over 560 operators in Allegheny County and more than 4,000 members statewide. On behalf of PRLA, I would like to thank you for your interest in addressing short-term rentals in the city of Pittsburgh. We support this effort. Our members are not opposed to competition from online home sharing companies, but we do believe there needs to be a better regulation, which would not only level the playing field, but also, importantly, ensure the health and safety of Pennsylvania residents and visitors. With respect to this proposed ordinance, I'd like to offer the following comments. Firstly, we support the proposed requirement for owners of a short-term rental property to obtain and maintain a business license. In addition, we also support the establishment and enforcement of occupancy limits, including a maximum number of people allowed in a short-term rental property at any given time. We also believe there are some reasonable provisions that should be added to strengthen this legislation. And some of those include a requirement that a short-term rental property owner's contact information be readily available at a rental property at all times, and/or information for a local contact who would be available to be reached on a 24/7 basis. We also recommend a liability insurance requirement. We'd recommend a minimum age requirement to book a short-term rental property of 21 years old, as well as a requirement that a short-term rental property be subject to safety inspections. We believe that these provisions would make this legislation more effective, as well as hold short-term rentals to a standard of safety and also regulatory enforcement that is more comparable to that which hotels and bed and breakfasts are already held. So once again, I'd like to thank City Council for your willingness to address this issue today, and we hope to be part of a continued dialogue on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Robert Cranmer.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Robert Cranmer. My address is 3406 Brownsville Road. That's right over the Carrick line in Brentwood. I'm the owner of a bed and breakfast, a legal bed and breakfast, and also I'm here today representing the Pennsylvania Association of Bed and Breakfasts in. Airbnb, what does the name, where does that even come from? You probably know that as the story goes, someone goes to State College or some college town for the weekend to go to a football game. There's no place to say, hey, I have a spare room and I have an air mattress. Put it on the floor, thus you have Airbnb. It started out as a very casual, as was already mentioned, casual situation where someone has a spare room or spare space, and thus it's grown into this large industry. When I chose several years ago to turn my 3-story home into a bed and breakfast after my divorce, and I was in the house by myself with 5 bedrooms and 4 full baths, I started out on the process of not only creating the bed and breakfast, but also going through the regulatory approval process. I had to go to the Borough Council. I had to provide architectural drawings of the house. I had to abide by all safety requirements, i.e. fire extinguishers, emergency lightings. I have to provide off-street parking in a parking lot on my lot for all of my guests. I had to go to the county health department. They come and they inspect. They inspect every year. They look at not only cleanliness, they look at the rooms, they look at the occupancy, they look at the number of bathrooms, so I'm not running some type of a flop house. So you have to go through jump through a lot of hoops. Once Brentwood saw what I went through to establish my bed and breakfast, legally I might say, they then reviewed what Airbnbs were in Brentwood, wrote a legislation like you did, and basically put them out of business because they could not meet the same standards that I was required to meet. Now, the other consideration, which was also mentioned, is the hotel motel tax. I pay sales tax and I pay hotel motel tax for every guest that stays. And I might say 20 years ago when Murphy and I and DeWita put together Plan B, a large part of the funding for the stadiums and the convention center is the hotel motel tax. So if you have hundreds of Airbnbs not paying hotel motel tax, that's a lot of money. I know I registered with the county. They send me a bill every quarter. We have to justify how many guests we had, and we have to write a check to the county every quarter. I think Airbnb has some aggregated format where they do that. So my time is up. I think I made my points in saying that these
Thank you, Robert.
Airbnbs have to be regulated. Thank you very much for your time.
Our next speaker is Jaw G. Jaw, you're online?
Okay, it's just my audio. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank the council members for their time. Bobby is already aware of this, but I live in the neighborhood of East Georgetown. The shooting occurred less than a 5-minute walk from an Airbnb that I've been running for almost 8 years as a super host. So this tragedy affects me not just as a small business owner in the area, but also as a resident and community member. I am active in the Cascade Board, the Community Alliance of Spring Garden in East Georgetown, and these are my neighbors and friends who died and were affected. And this senseless tragedy, the proposed legislation, and we've reviewed it. I am in an Airbnb hosts group where we have analyzed it to excruciating detail, does nothing to prevent this tragedy from reoccurring. I would like to reinforce, though I think most of the speakers will be focusing on business issues and the legislative overreach, and how there's been a backlog of necessary legislation for short-term rentals. I do not think it is appropriate for this backlog of legislation to be used under the guise of addressing a tragedy, because this does nothing to address the tragedy. Nothing proposed in the legislation would prevent the same shooting from reoccurring. Airbnb has many policies over the years that everything that happened that weekend, the underage guests, the 200 some people in a party, all of those are illegal under Airbnb policies and under various policies, both local and state and city and whatever. What we need is better enforcement of existing laws, and just better, honestly, gun control and just mental health support systems in the area. Those are issues that I focus on. I've been through the Citizens Police Academy, the mayor's program for civic leadership, and I would just like to reinforce there are better ways to solve the problems that keep reoccurring, the nationwide tragedies that seem to happen on an almost weekly basis, of tragic shootings, and adding additional burdens to small business owners like myself. A lot of people who own Airbnbs in the areas are like me, minorities, immigrants, women, people who are just struggling to get by in our current difficult economic times with high.
Thank you, Joe. Our next speaker is Chad Wise. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Chad Wise. I own property in Lawrenceville. I represent Steelstra. We're the Steel City Short-Term Rental Alliance. We're a group of individuals that represent concerned citizens, short-term rental operators, part-time hosts, cleaners, local business owners, and everyone in between that benefits from STRs. When families travel from out of town to visit our world-class museums, when friends gather from across the country to attend Steeler games, or when Netflix cast members are filming in town, they book our short-term rentals. When someone's home experiences a fire, when a family from overseas flies in for life-saving surgery at one of our globally known hospitals, or a Yinzer simply needs a staycation in the city, they book our STRs. Having STR well distributed across the city spreads tourist dollars throughout our local businesses rather than concentrating it in the downtown core. Additionally, this past weekend, when students from across the country or from across the city were graduating, there were a total of 4 remaining short-term rentals available, and the hotels throughout the city were sold out. The city needs more places to stay, not fewer. We collectively provide a uniquely tailored hospitality service that's simply unmet by hotels. We've had an active community of hosts since 2015, when the city first initiated potential regulation of short-term rentals that several city council members were part of. Steelstra has evolved to further incorporate everyone that benefits from STR, where our original Airbnb group had primarily focused on hosting best practices and knowledge sharing. We officially formed Steelstra in early April, before the Northside incident, to represent ourselves with a consolidated voice with the express intent of working with city to develop responsible short-term rental legislation. We know that the vast majority of hosts act in good faith to be valuable members of our community, and as we continue to organize, we look forward to helping all hosts become even better hosts and better neighbors in the future. I stand before you all today to unequivocally state that Steelstra welcomes effective legislation, the key word being effective. We ask to be invited to work directly with you, with other city leadership, and with other community members to help develop this legislation. With your experience and your support, we can help to prevent and eliminate issues that can negatively impact our neighbors, Pittsburgh tourism, and our Steelstra members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Our next speaker is Caitlin Jones.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Caitlin Jones, and I'm a resident of Beachview. First off, I want to say that the Easter Sunday Northside shooting is a terrible tragedy that is not disputed. Our reaction to this event as the opportunity to regulate short-term rentals is a pivotal moment, and we should make sure we aren't drawing misguided conclusions about what regulations would actually help create safer and better regulated communities. In discussions in recent weeks, I've heard various categories of Airbnb owners be suggested as possible bad actors. LLC-owned properties and arbitrage units, to name 2. LLC does not necessarily mean faceless, out-of-state corporation. I own one short-term rental in the name of an LLC because I co-own it with a partner. My partner is my best friend from college. We are both CMU graduates and Pittsburgh natives. I live 5 minutes away from this property that I co-own within this LLC. In fact, I live closer to all of my short-term rentals than I do to my long-term rentals, which are in Swissvale and about 25 minutes away. I live in Beachview in an 8-unit apartment building. My only 2 arbitrage units are in my same building. It doesn't get much closer and community-oriented than that. I deeply care about my neighbors, and many are my friends. Everyone in the building knows I do Airbnb and has my phone number to make direct contact if they experience any issues, which they never have. I have a reputation to uphold with my neighbors to avoid awkward, contentious run-ins at the washer, dryer, and mailboxes. I even go out with gloves and a garbage bag the day after trash day and pick up all those little bits of trash blown around by the wind from my building's common areas. In this way and others, I would say my long-term tenant neighbors benefit many times over from the fact that they live next door to an Airbnb. My guests are not partiers with the intent to commit violence. They are families relocating to Pittsburgh who need a place for 6 weeks while they navigate a historically brutal housing market. They are traveling nurses, doctors, and architects. They are hopeful musicians auditioning for the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. They are high school seniors and their families attending admitted student stay at Point Park, CMU, Duquesne, and Pitt. These are future residents of Pittsburgh. There's also families attending dance competitions, basketball tournaments, and more. There's folks from central Pennsylvania who just want to take their kids to a real zoo or have a date weekend where they can actually go to a nice restaurant and do some actual shopping that is not available in their small towns. These are incredible, kind people who treat the property and neighbors with respect. Airbnb has helped me get back on my feet financially after my entire industry was decimated by the pandemic. I was a group fitness instructor. I went from unemployed and accruing credit card debt to finding my financial footing and being the proud owner of 1 single family home, 2 duplexes, and 2 arbitrage Airbnb units, in addition to my management company and personal training business in under 2 years. I am not a faceless out-of-state investor hiding behind an LLC. I am a Pittsburgh native and a proud Beechview resident who cares about our community. Thank you, Council, and I look forward to cooperating on legislation that will truly help prevent nuisance Airbnb guests and irresponsible hosts while supporting safer communities and thriving small business.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ellie Harward. Ellie, are you online? Not in person. Okay, we'll come back to that at the end. Next speaker is Cassandra Brandy. We'll come back to Cassandra as well for a second opportunity. Next speaker is Colleen Martin. All right. Next speaker is Becky Mingo. Becky, are you online?
I'm here.
Thank
you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Becky Mingo. I live at 165 Roop Avenue, Pittsburgh, 15206. I am giving you feedback today as a private individual resident. I am not representing any business or organization, and I am also not speaking in my capacity as a planning commissioner. I just want to make that clear. And to thank you guys for taking public input on this proposed ordinance for short-term rentals. I appreciate all the time that council, staff, and all the stakeholders have spent working and refining this proposal. As a private individual with my husband, I own and manage 1 apartment as an Airbnb and have since 2014. I take pride in being a superhost and really value excellent property management. There are a few areas of this draft ordinance that require some future study, and so I'm here today to ask you to spend a little bit more time studying, collecting data, and doing some more research, and really looking at what other cities have done as prototypes, and maybe even asking your zoning staff to sort of weigh in on this ordinance. I have a couple of specific comments about the ordinance. So the current draft of the STR ordinance, section 768.01B, regarding the total number of occupants right now, refers to family limiting, the family section, which limits the occupancy to a group of not more than 3 people who need not be related by blood or marriage. And I'd like to ask you guys to consider rewriting this section to allow for more unrelated individuals to stay in an STR. Perhaps the language is similar to what is currently written in section 911.4.A.9A1, like the bed and breakfast that talks about limiting the number of people per bedroom plus children. Many times we see guests traveling here to visit family or for a football game, a hockey game, or a wedding. You might see a couple traveling with another couple who brought 2 children, and those 2 children brought 2 friends. That's 4 unrelated groups of people. Or you have a group of 4 couples traveling together with their children for a wedding. None of those groups would be allowed in this short-term rental ordinance the way the draft is written. I think they're wonderful visitors for our city to embrace and welcome in. Haven't you yourself or your friends travel this way to other cities? Do we really want to limit our tourist traffic in this way? And then number 2 is, I would like you to consider extending the maximum length of stay to at least 6 months. After 2 years of COVID, we have seen an uptick in travelers. This year, I've had several families from Europe stay with us. They are eager to visit and stay near family they haven't been able to see for quite some time. Weekend guests are our average guests, but each year we generally have 1 family that stays with us for 3 to 6 weeks as they prepare to move to Pittsburgh from another city and are waiting for their permanent home to be ready here. And I love to be an ambassador to help somebody become a Pittsburgher. In the wintertime, we often have visiting doctors from Europe.
Thank you. And for the record, we're joined by Councilwoman Gross. Our next speaker is Julie Ransom. Julie, you can begin speaking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie Ransom, and I have been an Airbnb host since 2008. I am the second person in the entire city of Pittsburgh to be an Airbnb host, and I've been continuously operating as a host for the last 13 and a half years. I started hosting as a way to help me financially during a job search and downturn in the economy, which is a nice way to say I was out of money, desperate for a job, and realized the only way I could possibly make money was through my primary residence in Lawrenceville. I began renting 2 rooms in my house, then sold that house. I bought 3 units in the East End that I rent out, which I continue to this day. In 2013, I formed a local Airbnb hosting group, which has since grown to over 400 members. We represent approximately 2,000 rental units throughout the greater Pittsburgh area, most of which are within the city of Pittsburgh. 7 years ago, I was pleased to be part of a team assembled to regulate short-term rentals, which are defined as rentals lasting fewer than 30 consecutive nights. We recognize the need to operate legally, and we have always welcomed the chance to work with members of City Council, the Mayor's Office, and departments governing zoning and occupancy laws. We were one of the first groups to support 14% hotel occupancy tax, and we welcome the opportunity to be taxed as such and regulated as short-term rentals. We want to come out of the shadows and into the light and be properly regulated. I cannot stress that enough. Together, 7 years ago, we drafted legislation that was simple, straightforward, and efficient. It was an annual registration for all term rental operators. I encourage you to get in touch with Councilperson Gross, who was integral in these meetings, to see what we did, what we accomplished, and perhaps use that as a starting board to bring new legislation forward. Like all of you, we were shocked and saddened by the tragic shooting that took place over Easter. We agree every aspect of the event should be closely investigated. Despite media reports, millions of Airbnb stays occur every day without incident. Thousands of people in the greater Pittsburgh area.
Thank you, Julie. And I apologize if I mispronounce his next name. Michael Sabkoviak.
Thank you so much, Council. So my name is Michael Sabkoviak. I live at 300 Coltart Avenue in Oakland. I've lived there for 25 years. Longtime Oakland resident. I'm also an Airbnb host. I've been doing this for about 10 years. We mostly do Airbnb for grad students, professors, folks who are coming in. And I appreciate the legislation and trying to move forward with trying to find a legal way or a more formal way of handling Airbnbs in the area. I think the challenge for you out there is in the legislation right now, you have the 1 to 15 days. I think we need to make it 29 days or less, just clarify that. I think the other thing, if we could have a liaison to work with the public safety, right? I think that was one of the challenges that occurred here on the incident on the north side, is that even the police showed up. We need to figure a way to communicate better with public safety. And I fully encourage that. We've had issues at other places, and the police just don't know how to handle it because it's a private residence or whatever. So if we can have a liaison with the public safety, that would be a big help as well. My neighbors know that I run an Airbnb. They prefer that I'm there than the college students that were there before. I help cut their lawn. I shovel their driveways. I am part of the community. I live 5 blocks away, so I understand the importance of being a good neighbor, and so do all my guests. And they've often talked to my neighbors, and that's one of the things they appreciate is being in the neighborhood like that. Trying to think of anything else but no, I think this is the other thing is LLCs. 2 of my properties are under LLC. LLC isn't a bad thing. It's just an accounting thing. Sometimes it offers you protection. I have full insurance on all my buildings. I think that's another key thing is to have that out there. But I fully support the legislation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Molly Richter. Molly, you can begin speaking.
Hi there, thanks for having me. I'll be really brief. I'm a super host in the East End. We take so much pride in serving the guests that reach out to us and want to stay with us and hopefully have wonderful visits with us. Like others have mentioned, the CMU graduates come to mind, the people relocating, the locals who are doing construction on their homes, maybe unexpected construction. Of course, we want to know how we can be the best neighbors and serve the community really well. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Our next speaker is Alonzo Palmino.
Yes, hi. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. My name is Alonzo Palmino, and I'm part of the partnerships team here at Minute. I'm sure you're wondering, what it is that we're doing here. We actually offer a noise monitoring device that helps to monitor noise, occupancy monitoring, and motion detector. And the reason we're here, though, is because we believe that there are tools to help with enforcement of regulation, but even more importantly, even before regulation is put into place, to provide hosts with some tools that they so need to be able to run their businesses in a way that is also quite respectful. We believe travel has changed tremendously in the last few years, and short-term rentals are a way of travel that works so well for families, for couples, groups of friends, most of who are just trying to get to know a new area and are doing so in a very respectful manner. Data shows that most guests are actually not problematic, and that short-term rentals actually bring a huge economic impact to the area. So what I wanted to propose was, before we look at legislation, perhaps we can also just explore some of the tools that are available for hosts to help explore how to do this in a way that helps to gather data. So I know we work with quite a few owners and hosts in this area. And just as an example, I believe it's 94% of noise issues are resolved within 15 minutes using a tool like ours. So if that is the case, then what we propose is looking at some of the tools that are out there, not only to resolve noise issues, pretty much as quickly as they begin, but also to help draft legislation and also to help to enforce legislation. We've actually worked with a few communities around the world to create pilot programs. So certainly if anyone's interested in that, please do reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to go over how some of these pilot programs have helped other communities around the world to draft some legislation and create some rules for the short-term rental industry and those hosts that are operating in that area. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Carrie D Thorne.
Hello, council members. My name is Carrie D Thorne. I'm a longtime resident of Pittsburgh. I grew up in the West End, currently live in Mount Washington and have since 2012 when I came back from playing basketball. Since 2012, have been a real estate investor as well as a licensed real estate agent. I am aware of all the real estate laws. I take continuing education, and I help people buy and sell their homes. I'm also an investor, so I purchase ugly homes through my contracting company. We come in and we renovate those homes and then try to improve them for the city. I've been a short-term rental host since 2017. I have a full-time team of 3 people, a maintenance man, 2 helpers. I employ a number of other subcontractors like cleaners, electricians, landscapers. We make sure trash goes out on trash days. We make sure the lawns are cut, garden beds are mulched. We actually over-improve the properties compared to a long-term rental. On my long-term rentals, I oftentimes don't mulch. I ask the tenants to. They usually don't. So we're actively improving these properties. Over 5 years, I've hosted thousands of guests to our city from every continent except Antarctica. As mentioned before, guests for Pirates, Penguins, Steeler games, the museums, all the restaurants. I've hosted construction crews who come in here to hang hundreds of TVs in a hotel or to install solar panels at your neighbor's house. I've hosted families celebrating weddings, graduations from the universities, and also for the medical procedures, which I think with a 15-day rule is a really limiting thing for them. Currently, I just had a couple in, they were having a liver transplant. They rented my house to have a comfortable place to stay so their families could be with them. They were staying longer than 15 days. They had an 18-day recovery window. They're not the first person. I've had a mother who had brain surgery. I have another family coming in this next week that their child's having a procedure done at Children's Hospital. So that's a really viable segment that I think needs to be reconsidered. These people are seeking flexible travel options, furnished studios for a month while they're here on an internship, or a 4-bedroom house that they can enjoy with loved ones. And this brings up the whole city. They're spending money in our local businesses. They're renting paddle boards at the river, taking Ubers and Lyfts, and we as hosts are paying short-term and hotel tax. Each of these properties is a reflection of the host and responsible hosts. My concern is out-of-state investors and management companies that aren't local here. I'm a local person. I live in the city. I'm a professional. We have a brokerage in the South Side where I hang my license. I'm reachable. I'm actively improving Mount Washington, and as a resident and investor, I take pride in the properties and what we do. So I'm for responsible regulations that allow responsible hosting. And that can bring economic benefit to everybody, the industry workers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Sarah Wilson. Sarah, if you're online, you can begin speaking. Okay. Or we'll come back at the end to check. I apologize if I get this. Well, I apologize to anyone if I've mispronounced your name. Next speaker is Brian Hakgalakis. Online. Brian, if you're online, you can just begin speaking. Okay, and then I'll just say this. If anyone's online on a phone, I think it's *6 to unmute yourself. Just an FYI. We'll go to the next speaker, Carrie Reed. We'll circle back around. Next speaker is Kevin Graves. Kevin, you can begin speaking.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you all. I appreciate the council's time. My name is Kevin Graves. I'm a resident on Melwood Avenue in Polish Hill. My wife and I own 2 rental properties in Polish Hill. One of them we do as a short-term rental. We are fully in support of some legislation to register and license short-term rentals. We do want to make sure that it is sensible, however. It was brought up earlier, the occupancy limitation. We did have one rental last year where a couple who lives in Lawrenceville was having a newborn, and they rented our property for a month so that they could have their families come and go at their convenience because they could not host them at their own home. So that did end up in probably higher occupancy than the proposed ordinance would allow. I think the other big sticking point for us is the 15-day limit. We've had a real focus at our rental property on longer term stays. We had a family of 4 come up from Atlanta while the teen daughter was here for a film or TV production as an actress. We had a married couple relocate here temporarily while they explored possible permanent relocation to Pittsburgh. So they were here for 6 weeks. We had a retired couple visit their son and daughter-in-law for a 6-week stint. We had another family of 4 who stayed here for 8 weeks while their home was being remodeled. We've had international Carnegie Mellon students who were unable to return home during the winter break, stayed at our property for 5 weeks because they had no means of staying at the student housing. We have an upcoming stay with a former University of Pittsburgh alum with her husband coming back to town for some time doing research at the university for the entire semester. So I think it would be very important and critical for us as well as the city to make sure that the longer term stays would be allowed under this ordinance. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Here, 22, Joy. Our next speaker is Joy Chen. I'll come back. Next speaker is Darrell Lorenzo. Darrell, you can begin speaking.
Good afternoon. My name is Darrell Lorenzo, 108 Dunlap on Observatory Hill. I'd like to thank Mr. Wilson, the members of City Council, civic leaders, and my fellow neighbors for hearing me today. In large, I applaud leadership for taking actions to improve the safety and general well-being of Pittsburgh's many neighborhoods. I purchased my home on Observatory Hill in November of 2003. Just a few more months and I'll celebrate 20 years of home ownership in the city of Pittsburgh. In 2018, I started offering lodging using Airbnb in the neighbor's house with the owner's blessing. He's actively deployed in the military protecting our country. The pandemic put an all-stop during lockdown for several months. Outside of that, the property is operated without notable incident through present. The police have never been called to the property. As a resident of the neighborhood, just shy of 2 decades, I've developed great relationships with most of my neighbors. Some choose to live more privately, and I respect that wholly, although I do wave at everyone that passes me when I'm outside doing yard work or weeding my garden. As a respecting neighbor, I made it a point to talk to the abutting property owners about the property being used as an Airbnb. The largest irritant to the street, with or without vacant housing, is always parking. Every new guest disrupts parking temporarily until they figure out who parks where typically. As a homeowner and a resident, I personally do not enjoy the quick turnover. If you were to ask the neighbors which they prefer, new faces in vehicles every 2 weeks, or a new neighbor for 6 months, you will not likely find anyone who demands a rotating door. While this proposal mentions parking, there are no articles that dictate how many vehicles any given property or dwelling may allow. I'd be lying if the street hadn't been internally discussing a push for permanent parking. While it would be more convenient in theory, the reality of parking enforcement on a mostly single home detached residence street would ultimately prove for a more frustrating situation for us all. As a proposed supplement to resolve the parking, the definition of allowable vehicles per dwelling should be based on bedrooms. I personally limit all my guests to 1 vehicle. I do not allow my guests to entertain guests. The property is a single family, 2-bedroom home. My max guest limit is 4 people. I personally, as a member of the community, still limit vehicle to 1. A reasonable metric to dictate the limits would be 1 per bedroom, in my opinion. If this legislation aims to deter tragedies like the shooting on the north side, the 15-day minimum limitation will only likely promote those undesirable activities. My guests must minimally stay for 7 days. The property in large is for temporary housing for workers, students, for people who have dying long-term patients in Allegheny General, and people moving to the city that need somewhere to live while they find more permanent housing. I object to the guests being limited to the 15 consecutive days in any 30-day period. In no manner will this prevent any undesirable activities or behaviors. Parties are banned on the entire platform. Bad actors and negligent owners are responsible for the most prominent negative behaviors. I urge this governing body to strike this completely. I do so as both a resident and as a host. In closing, some considerations as both a resident and homeowner who has called Pittsburgh home since 2003, as well as an active host for.
Thank you, Jerome. Our next speaker is Kimberly Canties. I go through your list. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go through the list. And then if anyone's, so just for anyone who did join that we skipped over, I'm going to try and see if you did join now or in the past few minutes. Let's start with Ellie Harward, Cassandra Brandy. Okay, Cassandra, you can begin speaking.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Cassandra Brandy. I have a duplex
that I run both units as an Airbnb in the West End. I understand that a few bad apples have brought the entire bunch of hosts into question with regards to short-term rentals. But after I'm done speaking, you'll understand the gravity of how unnecessary and potentially dangerous these proposed regulations are. To start, none of the proposed requirements in the business license would have prevented the tragic North Shore shooting on April 17th. Even if the host would have followed all the steps laid out to get a business license and maintain it, ultimately the host cannot control the actions of guests, and law enforcement needs to step in. We do not need to make more regulations. We need to enforce the laws and violations we already have. For example, the Pittsburgh Parking Authority already has 58 infractions on the books that can be used to control traffic. The Pittsburgh PA Code of Ordinances addresses noise violations and excessive noise between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., with penalties starting at $300 for most violations. I've only listed a small fraction of what is currently available to law enforcement, inspectors, and frustrated neighbors. I may also add that these enforcements are required of long-term rentals, and short-term rentals should not be singled out when we are all required to follow the same laws. Guest stays should not be regulated to 15 consecutive days or less. Whether the council agrees with it or not, there's a serious demand for short-term housing. In the last 6 months, we've housed guests longer than 15 days for the following reasons. New property owners that moved from out of state, but their closing on their new home was delayed. Traveling nurses brought in to address the nursing shortage, with contracts averaging 13 weeks in length. And it's already been mentioned, but medical destinations are very popular because of our specialized hospitals. They need to stay additional time so that they can recover, go to follow-up appointments before they can make the trip home. The new proposed regulation would force us to turn away every single person I just mentioned. Not to mention, severely limit the amount of tourism revenue short-term rentals bring to the city. As I stated before, I do not believe short-term rentals are exempt from local laws, and that includes anti-discrimination prohibitions that long-term rentals also need to follow. Platforms like Airbnb have already taken issues such as racial discrimination into effect, and their hosts can be thrown off of the platform for not following their policies. On Airbnb, we can't even see the image of the guests before accepting the reservation. A business license will not help curb this problem. Finally, the proposed regulation should not require the owner to disclose their ownership or the address of the rental property. And most importantly, for safety reasons. Airbnb does not give out the exact location of the short-term rental to help us as hosts prevent burglaries, and God forbid, we've had people escaping domestic violence situations. And if their abuser could find out where they are, they'd be in danger. I propose that everyone simply follow the laws.
Thank you, Cassandra. Our next speaker is Colleen Martin. Okay, we're not seeing you online. Sarah Wilson. Brian Gallicus. Carrie Reed. Hi, Carrie. Can you unmute yourself? You can speak.
Yes. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak this afternoon. My name is Carrie Reed, and I'm a resident, homeowner, and a business owner on the north side of Pittsburgh. I've also been a short-term rental property owner, manager, and also a co-host since 2017. And I'm an active member of the Steel Straw Short City Short-Term Rental Alliance. For the past 5 years, or 20 quarterly assessments, I've consecutively been what Airbnb calls a superhost. This is an indicator of the quality of homes that I open to my guests and the tailored concierge services that I provide them. And over these 5 years, I've had the wonderful opportunity to welcome more than 1,000 guests to the city of Pittsburgh. These include families that are coming to see their loved ones on holidays, parents attending commencement ceremonies for their children, tourists from all over the world who are visiting our city for the first time, and of course, the many fans of our cherished sports teams. With the majority of my guests having traveled from afar to enjoy everything the city has to offer, I have also had the opportunity and responsibility of providing a safe, quiet, and calming experience for families who are traveling to Pittsburgh for healthcare, surgeries, families who've lost a loved one and are having memorial services, as well as refugees who are going through the resettlement process. This brings me to the proposed legislation and the limiting of the number of guests. I recently hosted a wonderful refugee family of 11. That's a mother, father, and their 9 children who came to this city. Imposing restrictions without consideration for the size of the home or the number of bedrooms that can accommodate, it would have made it impossible for this family to stay for 8 weeks while they were waiting for the rental property to become available. I can say to you very honestly that I'm an atypical short-term rental host. I'm very hands-on with my guests from the moment that they inquire about my properties. For me, opening my home and hosting has always been a very personal experience, and I always want to make sure that my guests are comfortable, give them the best recommendations for dining, sightseeing, so that when they go home, they're going to tell their family and friends how great this city is and come back and do it over again. The service and experience that short-term rentals provide for families and tourists are rarely replicated in an ordinary hotel. And the high quality and comfortable spaces that we provide for a reasonable family-friendly price simply can't be replicated in any hotel. So simply put, many who are traveling here desire what I, along with so many of my amazing short-term rental owners and hosts here in the city, offer. And over the past 5 years, I've also employed dozens of staff members or staff in maintaining my homes, which include everybody from cleaners and furniture suppliers to small business contractors, handyman services who have helped me with renovating. Currently, I employ a team of 6 cleaners who are relying on my bookings each and every week.
Thank you, Carrie. The next speaker is Joy Chen. And our last speaker is Kimberly Canties. Okay, I find it's helpful to go through just, people that may have joined virtually. And then we'll turn to anyone that didn't register and would like to speak. You may have the opportunity now. And Tom, you want to come up? Yeah, come on, Tom. And then, give him 3 minutes. Yeah, typically we give 1 minute, but we'll give you 3 minutes.
I just have a few sentences I'd like to say.
Okay. Can you state your name and neighborhood?
I will. I am Tom Barbush, and I live at 828 Beach Avenue on the north side. And it's a residential district that has some Airbnb activity. And I would say that I'm in support of the ordinance that you councilmen have put together. I want to point out that not all Airbnb business can be painted with the same brush. So one size does not necessarily fit all. Very suitable Airbnb businesses operate on my street where it is an owner-occupied house, where they have the proper parking, where they are on site for management, and they have a 7-room house and they rent out a room or 2. That, in my view, is certainly one category of Airbnb, but there are other Airbnbs that operate differently, that might host a rave party in a 5-bedroom house that has no parking, and it disrupts the peace and tranquility of our neighborhood. People want to live in their house in peace and comfort, and I think Airbnbs can be an asset to our city, but they can also be a disruptor of one's peace and tranquility. So my suggestion is that there be some categories of Airbnbs to be established. And accordingly, maybe they fit in some zoning categories, but maybe they fit in others. Airbnbs that operate as a hotel, where there is no on-site management, where there are leases daily, where the occupancy is upward of 5 people or 10 people, perhaps that kind of business belongs in a commercial district. Airbnb business that is strictly small scale, I don't know how to categorize small scale, perhaps you do, but would fit maybe better in our R1 districts. So in closing, I just want to make the suggestion that some categories be explored and take a look at the zoning ordinances and see where these categories might fit best. That way, the Airbnb business can continue to prevail and peace and comfort for the residents of Pittsburgh.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks. You. I also got Fran's email as well with her comments, so I appreciate it. I'm going to go. We did see someone join, Sarah Wilson. Sarah, you can begin speaking.
Hello, my name is Sarah Wilson. I'm with, my company is Sparkle Property Management. I really appreciate you hearing me at the last minute. Sorry, I've been a little busy. I do have a property management company here in Pittsburgh. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about kind of what we do and how it affects the community in such a profound way. I started out just managing a couple, and then now I have a team of 23 men and women that live here in Pittsburgh and depend on a lot of the income that comes from this. They're all contractors, 1099 people. Most of them are working second jobs, and this is a way that they're paying for things, paying for trips for their kids, and it really does benefit the community. I've found that most guests at these properties are good people just coming to visit the city or go to their son's graduation. The vast majority are just good people doing the best they can. They're just here to stay for a little while, and they leave the properties in very respectful condition. I've done hundreds of cleans in the Pittsburgh area and only have had a handful of issues. And when I say issues, they're nothing like what happened. I do believe that there should be some regulations and there should be a way to keep people safe. But it's such a wonderful thing for the community. It brings people here, they can see what it's like to be a Pittsburgher, what it's like to live in the city, and what it's like to enjoy all the amazing opportunities that this city has. They stay in a property, they can walk to the incline, they can do all these amazing things that maybe they couldn't if they just stayed in a hotel. I think it is a great opportunity to bring people into the city, but it's also an opportunity for businesses like mine and others like mine, I'm not the only one out there by any means, to provide work for local people here. And there, again, like I said, of all the cleans, very rarely do we have issues. And it's only cleanliness kind of things, but I do believe there should be regulations to keep people safe. I do. But I just wanted you to kind of hear what it's like on this side of it, speaking for my team and probably other teams like mine that do the same thing. And we do depend on the income for our families and for our lives. And it's just something to think about from that side as well. So in closing, I won't keep you any longer. I appreciate you listening to my perspective on it. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, at this time, we're going to hear from members if they'd like to speak. We're going to start with people that have joined as
live. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I greatly appreciate you being here. Is that okay? Can I do that? Okay. Really do appreciate you coming out because this is an incredibly important topic, and I appreciate your willingness to engage. But more than anything, I really appreciate your willingness to engage in such a positive manner. When after the tragic event that took place on Easter Sunday happened, and Councilwoman Wilson and I had an opportunity to speak, I was clear to recognize during the course of numerous conversations about it that at the same time there was a family on the first floor of that building that were renting through Airbnb that were responsible patrons and had thankfully left the establishment before any harm could come to them. But I don't want it to go out there that somehow because council wishes to regulate short-term rental that we want to limit that to Airbnb and that all Airbnb is bad, because that is not what I believe, and I don't believe that's what Councilman Wilson believes or this council believes. But we do believe in proper I hate to use the term regulation, but for lack of a better word right now, I'll use the word legislation. But please recognize that this does go beyond the company of Airbnb, and it is more expansive to address short-term rental in its entirety. One of the things that was brought up here several times today, which I am in agreement with, after having talked with a very, very talented land use and zoning attorney about certain pieces of the legislation, he suggested that we were looking at it a little bit backwards to recommend a minimum or maximum stay, but that rather we should be regulating a minimum stay, which would certainly address the short-term rental of an evening or one-time rental that could very easily be rented to be a party of some kind, and would certainly assist with, and we heard this repeatedly today, long-term renters that have come to the city, whether it is for moving, going through a real estate purchase of a home, whether it's for medical care that has could last up to 6 months. So I really like the idea of regulating a minimum stay as opposed to a maximum stay. But the real new frontier of short-term rental as it affects the 3rd Council District, and what I'm seeing more often than not is retail space that is now being turned into short-term rental space strictly for the purpose of hosting an event. And it is primarily, if not entirely, for a single night. It is in a retail space. It is intended to host an event. And under Pennsylvania liquor law, any of these establishments can be BYOB, and there is no regulation by the Liquor Control Board or Liquor Control Enforcement because there is no license. And so it is becoming the Wild West. It is a completely new and previously experienced frontier of short-term rental, and it's causing great impact in a number of the neighborhoods that I represent, and especially the East Carson Street corridor, which we are seeing this more and more happening. And when you have a business corridor that has over 100 liquor licenses on it already, when you begin seeing retail then becoming short-term rental event space that is owned by LLC largely that is not local, but rather out of state, with no consistent form of communication. We spend considerable staff time in the office trying to track down the owners of LLCs that are largely out of state and are not anywhere near as successful as what we need to be. So that causes great concern to me. So I don't want to limit or lose the conversation that this is somehow limited to one company. This is really about the growing industry of short-term rental, how to regulate in a very positive and contributing manner, and to minimize negative impact on both business and resident alike who happen to live next to or in close proximity to a short-term rental. So appreciate Councilman Wilson's willingness to hold the legislation. There's been a lot of internal conversation around it. A lot of good ideas have come to the forefront, especially today. I appreciate your input and your contribution to the conversation, and promise you that there will be reasoned and professional consideration and conversation around the topic before we ultimately vote. So thank you. It was good to be here.
Yeah.
I was happy to join, and I appreciate your work and your effort and everybody that came today.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Councilman. And looks like you got some calls to get to.
Always.
I'd like to hear from, if you're willing to make comment, Councilperson Strasburger.
Thank you, Councilman. And I wanted to echo a lot of what Councilman Kraus just said and add to that although I heard this mentioned by at least one speaker, well, let me back up and say thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to everyone who attended today. Thank you, Councilman Wilson, for chairing, but also thank you to all of the co-sponsors and leads on this. I know also Councilwoman Gross has been on this issue for many years, so all of her work, I hope is taken into consideration as well. But one thing I wanted to mention was that I hope that the public does not think that this short-term rental proposed legislation is not a knee-jerk response to a terrible event that happened on the North Shore, that this has indeed been something that I think probably every council member has had on their mind for many years now. And this was the impetus needed to really then focus our attention on this, as our attention sometimes gets pulled in many different directions. Certainly something that I had been considering introducing for many years, and I'm sure others have as well. So I'm glad we're now focusing on this. Like other pieces of legislation, I think that it's as we've seen already, there are a tremendous number of factors that we have to consider, that there are examples from other states that we can look to see what's worked, what hasn't worked, the considerations that were brought to our attention today, both verbally and then submitted testimony that we've all received it by email, and then coming up with other ideas that might come to the table from land use attorneys, whoever else, and then deciding what makes the most sense for Pittsburgh. I don't think that we're going to have a cookie cutter approach that works for some other city necessarily, and assuming it's going to work for Pittsburgh. We need to figure out the method and the policy that works for Pittsburgh, covering, again, as Councilman Kraus said, not just Airbnbs, but short-term rentals altogether. And, to be honest, deal with a whole host of issues that I think one piece of legislation can't necessarily cover. Yes, we have to be mindful of what might need to be adjusted or considered when it comes to short-term rentals and legislation around that, but also parking and residential permit parking in some cases, or other types of parking accommodations or regulations, public safety considerations. There are likely, other parts of the code that then will see a ripple effect from this, including, what constitutes a family in Pittsburgh and how we address no more than 3 unrelated in a residential unit. So I just think there's a lot here, but my hope is that I can work closely with the lead sponsors on this to find the best set of policies for Pittsburgh and address as many of these questions and issues for a really sound piece of legislation for Pittsburgh. I'm trying to think. The only other thing I wanted to mention was, I think that covers it. I think that covers it. So thank you. I again appreciate your everyone's comments today, and I certainly will be taking them into consideration and asking many more questions as we move forward on this.
All right. Thank you, Councilperson. We'll go to Councilwoman Gross.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I also really appreciate hearing directly from the public on this issue. Thank you for everyone for turning out and having such clear and concise and helpful points. I took a lot of notes. I think some other council members have talked about the kind of buckets that we need to look at. What is the length of stay? What are the occupancy areas? What about parking considerations? And this conversation did start 6-7 years ago now, maybe even more if I look back through all my original emails. And it's nice to hear from some of the people who were in the original conversation, and that we all acknowledge, and we heard input today about how the dynamics have changed over time. It's it's really good to hear from local operators, and I really want to give everyone credit for also being self-organized in these associations and sharing input about how to be responsible hosts and how to really support each other in being hosts and working well with neighborhoods as hosts. So we have some good solid examples of the models that we want to encourage. And that will help us, I think, craft policy to figure out where the mechanisms are to help minimize the nuisance behaviors and the dangerous behaviors that we're seeing around Airbnb. I also have some of those party houses in my district. And 6-7 years ago, I did not. And I'll just say, I don't know if it's related or a causal consideration, but the places where there are party houses are larger houses in our new construction. I don't know if that's relevant but it's something I'm observing. And so we certainly have a lot of material, I've shared all the material from the work that we did with the zoning administrator and with PLI many years ago. And I think some of that has been helpful in the current language, but we need to continue to fine tune it. And this was a really, really helpful input session. So thank you all.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And I will make a few comments here. One, I just want to thank all the speakers that came in person and also online that joined us virtually. There were parts of this bill when it was introduced that, I didn't agree with initially, and I saw that and knew we were going to come to the public hearing and people would bring up those items. And quite frankly, I thought it was useful that we didn't correct some of it prior and try and get it perfect because, for instance, the 2 weeks or 14 days that was put in, I think that created a good conversation with people, even today listening to understand what the, what owners of Airbnbs, short-term rentals think would be appropriate. We heard some from the community that do not own, but mostly from, the insight of the owners. And so I thought that was really impactful because, we're going to be pressed with moving on from here and making some further decisions. I did want to mention that the issue or the subject of short-term rentals first came to me in the past 2 years that I've been here by way of a parking permit. So started thinking about, recently we overhauled the residential permit parking and started to include, an option for owners to have some passes for the renters, the short-term renters. And that really got me thinking about, what's out there, and then what had occurred, the horrific event that occurred had really just, for myself, just really, bumped up, made it a priority to understand what we can do and what we can really, what we can do further than just, trying to provide a better vehicle for, parking passes. So started going down the road of what really occurred, and we're still learning about that, what had occurred in East Dutchtown. But some things are clear, in terms of the inability to really understand who the owner is, who's renting it, what's all in the unit. There are several different, there's all types of data that we can gather by starting the process of actually, putting this under regulation. I started to meet with some owners, and in particular, I'll mention the acronym is, or the somewhat of an acronym is STEELSTRA. I guess the last part of it is Steel City Short-Term Rental Alliance, and it was helpful to because I wasn't thinking about this, that there would be a group, or some people have mentioned other groups that have started to form because they realize that regulation may be inevitable. So I thought that was really helpful to have an initial meeting. I think what I got most out of that meeting were a couple things. One was the data. Was that there is data out there, and we've been contacted by several companies that say, we will cross-check what's online for Airbnb, Vrbo, and any other short-term rental properties. But I guess there's some database that's called AirDNA, and I haven't looked into the validity of it, but I was presented with some data that was interesting about the amount of units that are actually rented in each neighborhood. It was broken down. So, I want to thank some of the owners that I met, about that data, and that's really what I get to is just really, what's out there, what's going on, and how can we really connect, which just points to the second point that I came to during that meeting was, how are we really going to connect public safety with the owners, the renters, the community. I mean, in an instance where, there is an issue and the owner is called, what can the owner expect, if there is something that is happening that's improper? Would the police actually, go into the property, if they're given the, the ability to do that? Would they stop what's happening? Would they, how far would it go? What can people and owners expect out of some regulation? How much we connect it to public safety? So those are all the things that I'm going through. I'm really interested in that first piece of it. I know there's a bigger conversation we had about zoning and what this, what's out there, and that's what I really like to see is just the data of everything that's happening in the neighborhoods. I believe the stat that I saw was less than 1% of houses in each neighborhood, less than 0.5%, were being used. So it does seem like it provides a there are those, well, if 0.5% of the houses are being used as Airbnbs, and if that, data is correct, that makes me believe like all the different options that people have mentioned here all seem like regular, useful, creative options for people that are coming to Pittsburgh and enjoying Pittsburgh and whether it's medical or for a Steeler game. So just want to mention to the public that I'm looking at all the options here, taking everything very seriously, and I'm looking forward to working with the sponsors and also council on this bill. So,
may I add one more comment?
Please.
Yeah, just briefly, if I may. Many of you are probably aware that I apologize. Many of you here and in listening in are probably aware that council has been working on a rental registry for approximately 14 or 15 years now, and it's been quite an experience. But one of the things that have come out of a rental registry is the requirement for a local agent, that someone that, especially if you are an LLC and you have rental property, that you have a local responsible agent that can be contacted 24/7, 365 around that property that is housed within that LLC. And I think that could be a very important component in this approach to helping to manage short-term rentals. I believe, and I'm certainly not trying to give them a pass in any way, but I believe because of the significance of the tragedy that took place here, Airbnb is really, really present and wanting to be a part of ongoing communication. And I know I've been personally reassured by representatives from Airbnb of ways that I can contact directly as it's happening if there are problems with Airbnb property. But if we have a multitude of individual LLC property investors that are doing short-term rental and they are housed within a limited liability corporation, it really does limit our ability to communicate in real time problems that could be happening with that property. And so I will work with councilmen and other members here to ensure that the conversation around having a local responsible agent within that LLC that can be contacted in real time if there are problems with that property, so as to, my busiest day is Mondays. I spend the entire day, probably 14 hours on the phone on Monday, because I deal with the things that happened that weekend, either Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday nights. And it's very difficult to communicate to property owners the disruption that was caused through properties that they own on a Monday morning when the call came in at Friday night at 1 o'clock in the morning. And so it just stresses the importance of having a responsible local agent that we can communicate with in real time to certainly mitigate problems as quickly, professionally, and efficiently as possible. So I just wanted to make sure that comment was on the record as well. Thanks,
Thank you,
Councilman,
Councilman.
very much. Thank you.
Yeah, the only other thing I just wanted to mention is that I mentioned some data here, and I can't help myself by talking about data, but that's what I want to get to is really on our side, understanding, what that looks like, because there's a lot of cross-check that be going on. The community will, identify properties that they're having issues with, and then, there's a lot that can come from it. So I'm looking forward to collecting our own data, trying to connect, resources to the community as well. But then also, I'm really interested in the PLI part in terms of the running the business in the neighborhood. Want some regulation around it.
The dynamics of Pittsburgh have changed drastically over the years. And we have clearly exceeded the 50% rental mark throughout the entirety of the city quite some time ago. We're probably, and I don't have definitive numbers, but we are probably close to 60% of all property in the city of Pittsburgh, residential property, is rental property. And that's, I'm not here to chastise someone for owning rental property, but you can understand the challenges that presents to local government, to be able to understand who, is operating that property as a business, and making certain that those properties are contributing in nature and not disruptive in nature. So it's a real challenge on all fronts for us, but we're willing to take it on. So thanks for your leadership. And Councilwoman Kell Smith and Councilwoman Gross, because when they say that this has been an ongoing conversation, this has been an ongoing conversation for many, many, many years. And unfortunately, it took a tragedy to bring it to the forefront, but we're ready to do it.
Okay, anyone else? All right, having exhausted the business of this public hearing, this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.